The New York Mets are in the postseason after they punched their ticket to the playoffs, winning the first game of a doubleheader over the Braves on Monday afternoon. However, no rest for the weary as they open their wild card series with the Brewers in Milwaukee later today. So let's preview the series with two of the best Mets podcasters in the game, Andrew Claudio, the host of Mets Therapy, and Anthony Rivera, the host of the Subway to Shea podcast. Both guys join me now. I have to start with this and ask you both. It was a roller coaster season for the Mets. It was a roller coaster ride on Monday. How are you guys feeling? How's everything going? What are the vibes like?
Vibes are good. Vibes are very good, but there's no time to stay calm because we have this game tonight, game one of the wild card. So we're right into it, just like the team is.
Yeah, right into it. What about you, Andrew? Also right into it? Vibes are still good?
Vibes are still great. The fact that they did it not just in the dramatic fashion they did, but in Atlanta, gives you the positive spin on this season, regardless of how this series goes. So I'm still riding that high, believe me, all the way into Milwaukee.
All right, there we go. That's what I like to hear. Positive vibes. Okay, so let's break things down. Andrew, I'm going to start with you because the Mets, as you just said, they had a thrilling ride to get to the postseason. They did exercise some serious demons down in the ATL yesterday. So do you think the quick turnaround in playing Monday's doubleheader will have any impact on the team being ready for the series against the Brewers?
I mean, it should. I mean, I can't imagine playing if the Milwaukee series started on Monday. It would probably have an effect on them. Now you add in that they went from Milwaukee to Atlanta back to Milwaukee, and it's just from human nature. You should be exhausted after just the flights alone, let alone the 18 innings of baseball that had to be played and a post-game celebration in a locker room. We heard earlier this season during a 10-game road trip how jet-lagged this roster was and these guys were, and they were vocal about it as well. I can only imagine how vocal maybe not vocal about this, but they'll be, but how tired they will be going into this series. But this is part of the story of this team, overcoming adversity, and this is just the latest bout of adversity that they're going to have to face.
You're right. This is the latest challenge that the Mets have to face. We'll see if they are up for it. Anthony, got to ask you this. Because the Mets won the first game of the doubleheader on Monday, they were able to save Luis Severino for game one against the Brew Crew. What does Severino have to do in order to shut down the Milwaukee lineup in the series opener?
Yeah, winning that first game of the doubleheader was pivotal because it allows Luis Severino to go on full rest. He hasn't pitched since last Tuesday against the Atlanta Braves, but he's got a career postseason record of 1-4 with a 5.15 ERA. I don't want to harp too much on that. It's a different era of Luis Severino that we're in now, but he hasn't been the best pitcher heading into the postseason, and that's not saying that he's been awful. But he hasn't been the best out of the group that has been pitching so well. The big thing for him is his ability to limit stolen bases because he's given up 15 stolen bases this year. Milwaukee's a running team, and they're going to need to figure out a way to stop them from running. I know the first time that he faced them was only the second game of the season. You don't want to put too much into that, but this Milwaukee team has been running all season long, and that's going to be a big deal for Severino to limit the stolen bases as well as limit walks, because that's an automatic right there to steal second base.
Yeah, that's going to be something to watch. We're going to get to those stolen bases in a second. Andrew, Francisco Lindor, he's been an on-base machine for the Mets as a leadoff hitter, and the team, they've been one of the best in terms of getting on base since May, when a lot of people thought the Mets would not be where they are now. Can the Mets have the same level of success getting on base against this Brewers pitching staff?
I mean, you'd hope so. I actually think there's other elements that they could potentially use to their success to try and win this series. But as far as getting on base is concerned, the Brewers pitching staff is third in WHIP this season. They're a team that does allow some base runners, but they also their bullpen in particular is second in left on base percentage. This is a pitching staff, specifically the bullpen, that if you get guys on, they don't usually score, and it's what's led to their team ERA, their bullpen ERA being second in the majors. They do give up a lot of home runs, though. I will say that, and the Mets being one of the top teams in the league in home runs. Might not even realize that, as frustrated as at times as Mets fans can be with this offense, that this team finished towards the top of the majors in home runs, and this Brewers team allows is 21st, so the 9th most in home runs per 9 innings, the 7th most home runs in all of baseball. So, yeah, maybe you get the power back into this series, and that'll help them. But it certainly help, especially with Lindor, as you mentioned at the top of the order, if guys are on base when those home runs are hit. So we'll see what happens.
That's the key. Can you get the timely hits? Can you get the timely home runs in the postseason? We'll see if the Mets are able to do that in this series. Now, Anthony, defensively in the series this past weekend in Milwaukee, we saw the Brewers, as you mentioned, they ran wild on the Mets and steal a bunch of bases. How do the Mets limit Milwaukee's base stealing game in this series?
Well, I think not giving up walks is a big thing, right? The Mets were 3rd in the league in walks, giving up 586 of them. The Brewers were 3rd in the league in getting walks, 597. So that's going to be a big thing for them because it's like an automatic chance to steal a base there. The Brewers have the 2nd most stolen bases in the league at 217. I would consider and I don't think they're going to do this, but I would consider having Luis Torrens catch maybe at least game 1 and have, Francisco Alvarez maybe play DH, at least to start the game. Got to set a tone, because that's what Milwaukee does. They set a tone when they get on base and they start stealing bases. You got to take that away from them. And having Torrens at catcher, he's the best defensive catcher we have. I think that may, help the Mets to start the series out.
I wonder if that is a move that we could see from Carlos Mendoza there in terms of the lineup for game 1. That's something to keep an eye on there. This one for both of you guys, because what's one area in this series that you believe the Mets have an advantage over the Brew Crew and must capitalize on? Andrew, I'm start with you on this one. What's one area you think the Mets have an advantage over the Brew Crew?
I got to be honest, there's very few as far as the styles make fights of it all. The fact that, to Anthony's point, that this isn't a Brewers team like the Mets obviously coming from the NL East and the Phillies and the Braves that will beat you with power. This is a team that gets on base and then wreaks havoc. So my hope is that a trend that's been happening since late August, and that the Mets don't really allow a lot of base runners, especially in their bullpen, but obviously the rotation has been great as well. Just don't feed into the fact that, as Anthony mentioned, this is a team that draws walks, that gets on base and steals bases. This is a team that didn't hit a ton of home runs this year and still finished 6th in runs scored in all of baseball. So my hope is that the Mets turnaround, and looking at what they've been specifically over the last month and a half, continues. And if that does, and they keep this team off the bases, then they might be able to wreak some havoc of their own.
All right, so an advantage for the Mets could be keeping the Brewers off the base paths. Anthony, what about you? What do you think is an advantage for the Mets? What must they capitalize on in this series in order to win?
I'm going to balance off what Andrew said earlier, and I'm going to talk about power. The Mets had 207 home runs this year to Milwaukee's 177, and home runs are huge in the playoffs. We've seen it in the past. We've seen it help Texas win the World Series. The Mets got to find that power stroke. They need we talk about this all the time. They need a clutch Pete Alonso to come into this series and take care of business. We already know where Francisco Lindor is at. We've seen it from Brandon Nimmo. We've even seen it from Mark Vientos. But if Pete Alonso, as well as JD Martinez, if they can get themselves back on track with some clutch power hits, that is huge for this Mets team. And also getting on base would help, get some runs in as well. But I think it's the power stroke the Mets need to win this series.
All right, well, you know this, Anthony. We've been talking about this all year. Mets fans have been waiting for Pete Alonso, to show up and have some big hits. We'll see if that can happen. Now feels like it would be a good time more than ever. Feels like the Mets fans would like this. Okay, guys, also this one for both of you. Considering this is a best-of-3 series, does Milwaukee have more pressure on them to win Game 1? And do you think it's imperative that the Mets win Game 1 if they are to win this series? Andrew, what do you think?
Dexter, it's not just some of the pressure. All of the pressure is on the Milwaukee Brewers, not just to win Game 1, but to win this series. Your opponent has played so much baseball in multiple cities over the past 48 hours. You're the home team, and this obnoxious trend that the National League pennant winner over the last 7 years has had to go through you still exists, and you're playing against the team that the president of baseball operations left to go to. So as far as I'm concerned, if you're a Brewers fan and if you're a Brewers player, the entirety of pressure is falling on you here. There's no scenario where you can justify losing to a team that just had to leave your city, go play 18 innings of baseball, and then have to come back with no closer available, their second best pitcher. I'm sorry, as far as I'm concerned, it's a massive disappointment for the Brewers.
All the pressure on the Brewers is what Andrew is going with. Do you agree, Anthony? And do the Mets have to win this first game of this series if they are going to have a chance to put even more pressure on the Brewers?
I don't know if it's so much pressure on the Brewers because they have, pretty much manhandled the Mets all season long, especially in Milwaukee. They've done it. So I don't know if there's as much pressure on them, but I will say this. If they go down 0-1 in this series and lose the first game tonight, we're going to see how resilient they can be. We already know how resilient the Mets have been. We've seen it all season. Every time that their backs were against the wall, the 0-5 start, the awful May, this lead up to the Atlanta series, this whole past week, the Mets have come out and have been resilient. And I think that carries them through, especially if they win game one. Maybe that will set a tone and we'll really see what this Milwaukee Brewers team is made of, because we haven't really seen them be tested at all yet this season.
Yeah, we have not. It'll be interesting to see how the Mets come out tonight. It'll be nice to start the series, obviously, with a victory. All right, guys, prediction time. This is what the people want. Wild Card Series starts today. What is your prediction for the series, Mets or Brewers, and in how many games? Andrew, you first.
So just to close the loop on the pressure, and Anthony just made the point even further, the Brewers have owned the Mets this year. They're 5-1 against them. Now, granted, the first time they played was the opening weekend series, and then the last time they played should have been the last weekend series of the season. So I don't know how much you can take as far as conclusions from those two matchups, but this is a team that you've largely succeeded against, and a team that you're better than, that has had a hectic travel schedule. All the odds are against the Mets, which is why we won't be upset if they lose this series. And honestly, the Mets should lose this series. And it's because of that I'm picking the Mets to win this series. All year, everything that shouldn't happen has happened for them. They have proven time and time again, the word Anthony used, resiliency is the backbone of this team and their DNA. So I think they might lose game one, and then after they've had a good night's rest that they haven't had probably in the last 6 days, they'll come out gangbusters and win the next two with I'm assuming Mania on the mound in game two, and then they'll figure out a way to win game three with the pressure riding all on the Brew Crew.
All right, Mets in 3 is the pick from Andrew. Anthony, are you going with the same pick? Are you going with the Mets sweep, or are you going with the Mets losing? What's your pick here?
Man, I hate to be a homer, but I got it, right? I mean, we're Met fans here. I'm saying Mets in 2, and this is why. I talked about it at the start of this whole conversation, that it was important for the Mets to win game one against the Braves in the doubleheader. Why? Because that allows Severino to go on rest, full day's rest or full week's rest. And now it has Sean Manaea doing the exact same thing. We were going to have Sean Manaea go in game one if Sevy had to win the final game of that series against the Braves. Now they're both on their solid rest, and they're coming off of 2 bad starts. I'm pretty sure they're inching to get back on the mound and prove why they are 2 top starters in the league this season. And I think we're going to see it, and I think the Mets get it done in 2.
Mets with the sweep is the pick from Anthony. I like the predictions, guys. I expected both of you to pick the Mets. You did pick the Mets, as the true Mets fans that you are. And so we will see how this all plays out. Game 1, Mets and Brewers starting later today. We'll see how it all plays out. That is Andrew Claudio, host of Mets Therapy. Hopefully the Mets fans will not need it after tonight. Therapy, that is. And that also is Anthony Rivera, the host of the Subway to Shea podcast. Guys do a great job breaking down the Mets on both of their shows. Check those out. Guys, thank you for joining me and previewing this series, and we'll see how the Mets do in this series.